Edinburgh. I think I've crossed this park in almost every kind of weather. Very hard to believe it was once a loch, but here it is. Open, patient, very picturesque, mildly indifferent. I ran the Meadows 10K here recently. I came second in category, but that's not very important. I crossed the Meadows as a student for 4 years or so. When you're a student, I think you believe you're moving towards something, a career, a shape, a fixed outline of self. You don't realize that you're also being altered almost invisibly by the ground that you walk across each day. This is where I taught my mind to sit still for hours on end, where I learned to listen. I mean, really listen. Listen to subtext, to motive, to the things that aren't said. It's where I first felt that electrifying recognition that thinking can change your life. It really can. And I also learned for the first time that I had an inner life worth exploring, because everyone does. The David Hume Tower, now renamed, revised, recontextualized, once seemed so very tall and imposing to me. I would look up at it and think, this is where serious things happen. Inside these lecture theatres, I began to understand that ideas are not abstract ornaments, but they're tools of empowerment. And across the square, the great angular form of the University of Edinburgh's main library, EUML, it's designed to resemble bookshelves, which I always think is almost too on the nose, but at the same time, it's kind of perfect. And then there was the School of Scottish Studies, also now renamed, where I learned ethnology, a word that sounds even now slightly esoteric. But here I learned that my people existed and that I had a culture. I've always said that a degree in ethnology is probably the closest thing you can get to a qualification from the University of Life. Not because it's romantic, but because it insists that culture is lived before it ever becomes theorized. And it teaches you that ordinary, well, there are no ordinary people, as Ian Crichton Smith said, but so-called ordinary people carry epics within them, and that listening itself is an ethical act. A few years later, I returned to this university as a lecturer on a one-year contract, fixed term, finite, and I stood at the front of rooms where I had once taken notes in the margins of uncertainty. It felt smaller than I expected, and also larger. Um, Smaller because, after all, institutions are filled with human beings like you and me, people improvising authority. And larger because responsibility really stiffens the spine. And I became acutely and lastingly and I think pleasingly aware of this kind of invisible, timeless, and I think altruistic chain that exists. Lecturer to student, voice to voice, influence travelling forward and outward through the years. The square didn't pause to mark my arrival, my return, nor my departure. Places are not sentimental. They continue. Runners trace invisible circuits. On race days, those circuits become visible, coned, marshalled, timed. Applause briefly thrums the air. But then, when the barriers come down, the park returns to itself. In the library, I began to write. In the tower, I began to wrestle with ideas. In the School of Scottish Studies, I learned that listening is a form of respect. I learned that becoming is cumulative. Running teaches you that you will return to the same stretch of path, altered slightly, lungs a fraction stronger, mind a fraction clearer, and ego, if you're wise, a fraction smaller. The park doesn't care about podiums, it cares about weather. The meadows remain, and George Square remains. New students arrive with the same quiet hunger that I had. And they don't know yet precisely how they're going to be altered. Perhaps for some people that's a mild frustration. But for most people, it's the very mercy of it.
You mean like